Hello and welcome to Reporters on France 24. Now, in Iraq, feminism is a fringe concept with little uptake in mainstream society. The country's women are some of the world's most disempowered, with gender inequality pervading all levels of Iraqi society. In education, illiteracy rates amongst teenage girls are double that of boys, and in the workplace, there's only 14% of women employed versus 73% of men. That's according to UN figures. So rather than seeking higher education and career, women are expected in Iraq to marry young. Almost half of married women have faced some form of domestic violence, either emotional, physical or sexual, while the majority of men believe that they have a right to beat their wives if they disobey them. But there is a brave minority in the country challenging the status quo. Our reporters Jack Hewson and Lucille Wasserman met with three pioneers trying to further the cause of women's empowerment, and we're joined now by Jack Hewson from Baghdad. Hi, Jack. Can you give us a sense, before we see a report, of how you would qualify women's rights in Iraq now?
Well, Iraq hasn't always been as restrictive a place for women as it is now. In the mid-20th century and under Saddam's early rule, it was much more secular and women enjoyed greater freedom. But a mixture of religious revivalism during the sanctions of the 1990s and then 20 years of sectarian meltdown in post-Saddam Iraq have really reinforced conservative norms and disempowered the country's women. There's a deep sense of entitlement now prevalent among many Iraqi men that their wives should take a secondary role and they should be obedient to them. And in most cases, the state and the law serves to prop up this patriarchal thinking. For example, Article 41 of the Iraqi Penal Code essentially gives a husband the right to beat his wife if she is disobedient. So with the innate misogyny of both the system and society itself, it's pretty bleak from a gender empowerment point of view, and the inequality that Iraqi women suffer is huge.
All right, well, you caught up with some three people who are trying to make some changes in that regard. Let's take a look, Jack, now at your report.
أنا اسمي رشا خالد، محامية وأنا ناشطة نسوية. القانون فيه تراجع، ده يحكمنا اللي هو عيب عيب عيب، عيب تسوقين سيارة، عيب تطلعين للمدرسة، عيب تداومين، عيب تشتغلين، هذا كله عيب، هو مو حرام.
In Iraq's ultra-conservative society, women are constantly marginalised. Here, being a feminist comes down to shaking out customs and traditions, a risky fight led by a few Iraqi women like RASHA.
هسا احنا رايحين مركز شرطة الخنساء، منطقة شعبية وعشائرية تشهد تقييد يعني لحركة النساء.
Today, RASHA accompanies one of her clients for a second time to the police station. She claims to have miscarried and even suffered a stroke after being repeatedly beaten by her husband. To protect her, we will not reveal her identity and have changed her name to Zahra.
توقعين شنو راح تكون ردة فعلهم؟
راح اتوقع راح يصير اندفاع عليه، يلتجون للعشائر، ما راح يسلم نفسه لان العشيره وسيله ضغط على البنيه، لان اذا ما نفذت كلام العشيره يحرضون اهلي عليه باعتبار بنتكم ما مسيطرين عليها.
Zahra is nervous. During her first interview, the police accused her of lying. Stigmatized and judged, more than 97% of Iraqi women say they are not prepared to file a domestic violence complaint. Police should have arrested Zahra's husband that day, but he was not at home, and several weeks after this attempt, the ex-husband had still not been arrested. As we reach the police station, we will no longer be allowed to film. Instead, Zahra agreed to let us film her and RASHA discussing her case.
من كان يضربك أهله شنو كان دورهم؟
شنو كان دورهم؟ أهله كانوا متفرجين، طلقها.
For victims of domestic violence, there are few solutions in Iraq. Most women's shelters are illegal and regularly targeted by the authorities. Deprived of hope, Zahra says she tried to end her life.
انتحرتي؟
هاي أول مرة أقول.
شلون انتحرتي؟
شيء مت القزاز ذبحت الوريد، كنتم مدوني لأهلي سوا هسمه من عرف أنا انتحرت. هسه عادي من واحد يسمع انتحرت هاي يقولون مو زينة، ما يقولون ضغوطات ضربني بالحديد وراد جهضني وهاي، ما يقولون هذا السبب. هاي خذوني المستشفى دخلت شنو الحالة باعوا هيك شنو هاي يلا دخلت ايدها بالشباك وهاي وانجرحت.
يعني ما سجلوها بالمحاولة انتحار؟
لا تعاونوا ويا ذولاك.
الصراحة أشعر بالحزن وبعض الأحيان أشعر بالغضب. يعني نحتاج إلى قوانين أخرى ونصوص أخرى جديدة حتى تلبي التطورات والتغييرات المجتمعية اللي صارت. السطوة العشائرية هي اللي بدت يعني تضغي على السلطة القضائية.
Tribal laws are not the only obstacle for women demanding rights and equality. Even in Baghdad's more liberal enclaves, Iraqi women face the restrictions of an ultra-patriarchal society.
My name is Marceline. The feminism for me is just like being a human. It's just a word you can be it, like if you are a man or a woman, we all feminists. We all should fight for all rights.
Marceline is not her real first name, but it's the one that she chose and by which people now know her. With her loud style, she's never unnoticed in Baghdad.
This is one of some difference here in Iraq. Just because I'm a girl, it just makes me like, oh, why she have a lot of piercing? Why she have a tattoo? Even the women could be just the first enemy for any woman. Sometimes make me shocked when I see a girl told me, no, you are a bad one because you wear this.
Even among Baghdad's party scene, the younger generation can still be very conservative.
If you be in the party, even the people at the party just shocked like, there's a girl here? What are she doing here in the party? Because they believe that girls should be just inside the house, learn how to cook, how to raise kids, how just to focus on the man.
One of the few settings in which Marceline has found that she is comfortable is in Baghdad's tiny and deeply stigmatized LGBT community. In Iraq, many are killed for their sexual orientation, which is why we will not show the faces of any of the guests at this party.
If you don't feel safe on your country, on your nation, on your home, where did you can find the peace?
إذا أهلي دروا عرفوا حتعرض للقتل أكيد أو مشاكل، أتحارب وأنحرم من كل شيء، لأن إحنا بمجتمع حرفياً مريض وما يتقبل المرأة تكون حرة أو هيك.
Marceline has opposed the dictates of Iraqi society since her mother sought a divorce in 2016. That day, her father stormed their house with his relatives in objection to her decision.
At some point, I heard like someone like break through our door. There's a lot of people came. I hear a lot of huge voices. Like I hear a lot of shots in the house. I was like, what's happened here? So I leave my room.
No one was injured in the incident, but afterwards, Marceline says that she was forcibly taken into her father's custody and had her passport confiscated.
I do not want to live that. I do not want to be in cage because I do not accept their ideas. So in that time, I started to believe that I'm feminism because I have to fight for my rights.
Marceline managed to leave her father's home and rejoin her mother. For many women, divorce spells financial ruin. Marceline's mother has a government job, but only 2% of female-headed households have stable employment. Her mother wants to give Marceline the upbringing she never had, liberated from Iraqi norms.
أنا أحب الفن وأحب الغناء أحب التمثيل. أنا هاي الأمور كانت ممنوعة عندنا يعني أحبها أشوفها بها إنه تكون فنانة وأنا دائما وياها إن شاء الله يعني فما ردت أكون مثل أمي فردت أكون عكسها تماما وإنه أمنح مارسلين الحب والثقة والأمان.
After 2016, she just realized that, okay, we're actually a team. We don't actually believe in family system, we just like fight for each other. And that time I realized I'm not the only feminist here. My mom is feminist too.
Even with the acceptance of her mother, Marceline risks a lot to claim her rights. But what then of the more conservative segments of society?
واحدة من الحالات اللي تعاملت وياها أني إنه كان أكو بنت عمرها يطلع بال 16 سنة، فهي بقت فترة تتواصل وياي، فحكت لي قالت لي ست مريم أنا بدي موضوع دا يصير وياي. شوفتني إنه هي تتعرض للتحرش من أخوها بنفس البيت. تعرف شنو والدتها مسوية؟ ماخذتها الدكتور تكشف إنه هي بعد باكر.
In parallel to her government job, activist MARYAM SAMIR, through social media, has established contact with hundreds of women who live in the most conservative neighborhoods in Iraq. Faced with their testimony, she decided to organize writing workshops to encourage them to express themselves.
عمري 20 حاليا، بشهر الثامن 21 إن شاء الله. طبعا واجهت بداية الأمر صعوبة إنه أجي هنا، إنه أهلي قالوا شلون وأكو كاميرا لولا.
بصراحة بلشت بالمحافظات النجف باعتبارها محافظة دينية ومغلقة ودائما الناس نظرت لها نظرة إنه هي فقط بس بالدين. رحنا للنجف وقتها قالوا ست إنه هسه شو يقولون علينا؟ إحنا لابسين ونطلع بفيديو أو نجي ندوة، فقلت لهم اللبس ما يحدد ثقافة معينة. فسوينا محافظة النجف وبوقتها ورش عن الكتابة، وبنفس الوقت ردنا نشوف إنه اليوم إنه أنت تقدرين تلبسين عباية تلبسين حجاب بس أنت مثقفة وهذا ما راح يمنعك. كسروا هذا الحاجز إنه اليوم.
Since then, MARYAM has organized dozens of workshops in 18 provinces, allowing women to share their stories about their lives and families, and for her to tell her own.
شفت هالشيء أخويا أنا ضده، لأن هو صراحة ما يعرف شلون يعامل المرأة، وعنده كلش يعني لا مو غيره، يعني عقليته كلش محدودة، رغم إنه أنا ما أتدخل بتغيير شخص، يعني إذا ما هو قبل هذا الموضوع.
Herself from a conservative background, MARYAM feels she has an important message to spread. In 2019, she gave a TEDx talk, despite the disapproval of her family.
فيديو تيدكس من طلعت بيه حكيت إنه أنا شنو عانيت مثلاً وشون قدرت أوصل. هالفيديو أثر بكثير بنات. هي هاي الجذور إحنا متغلغلين فيها، إنه إحنا اليوم عاداتنا تقاليدنا تحكمنا بسبب المجتمع اللي عايشين بيه.
MARYAM can no longer count the number of clashes she has had with her parents, but hopes that one day they understand the reasons for her activism.
أتمنى يحسون بقيمة هذا الشيء اللي أحبه. هو مش عادي، هالشيء أبد ما عادي، لأن هم يحبوني وأنا أحبهم، بس هم هذا خوفهم هو السبب يعني، بس أنا فعلا بدي أسوي شغلة.
With nearly 2 in 3 Iraqi women believing themselves to be inferior to men, feminism still has a long way to go here. On the streets of Baghdad, there are few visible challenges to the status quo, but behind the scenes, female activists continue to fight for a more egalitarian society.
All right, we're back now after viewing that report. Jack, in the process of shooting this film, you actually had many problems with access. In one case, an organisation totally shut down on you for fear of antagonising the authorities. Can you explain a little bit more about that and why that is?
Yes, originally we had hoped to follow a character from the Organization for Women's Freedom in Iraq, which does a great job of protecting women from domestic violence. But at the time, they were being prosecuted by the authorities for kidnapping, of all things. And I believe we have a soundbite now that you can play from the head of that organization, Janat Al-Ghazi.
The authorities wanted to close us down. Every day we have someone arrested. For example, last week, one of my colleagues went to jail for 3 days because a victim called him and said she needed to escape her house. So he gave the address of the institution, and the authorities then considered it as a kidnapping case. If a domestic law was passed and allowed organizations to open their doors, we would not be under pressure like now. For the moment, we have to register the shelters under our personal names.
So as she says in the clip, many of their members were being arrested because under the law as it stands, women's shelters can be prosecuted for kidnapping if they help women to escape from domestic violence. And this is obviously patently, ridiculous. The domestic violence law that she mentions was first put before Parliament in 2014, but it's been stalled due to political opposition. So for people like Janat, there are huge dangers for protecting the victims of domestic violence, and the possibility of jail time is real. We asked to follow their court battles, but they were just too worried that it would further worsen their cause and they could be imprisoned.
So, Jack, how much space is there in Iraqi society for shifts in terms of secular voices, progressive voices coming in with any real impact? I mean, it's still a very conservative place, right?
Yes, one notable bubble of progressive secularism that we observed in the past 2 years was the October protest movement of 2019. At that time, demonstrators took to the streets to demand an end to corruption and government mismanagement, and both young men and women took to the streets to do that. At the time, an influential Shia cleric, Muqtada al-Sadr, called for the separation of those sexes during those demonstrations, and in response, women rallied, in defiance of him. Iraq's women are very much plural. You have urban elites and younger people who live much more secular and liberated lives, particularly in urban centres, but they remain a minority. Tribal and religious norms still dominate, particularly in rural areas. So while there are signs of progress, Iraqi society is still overwhelmingly conservative.
All right, a slow pace of change for women's rights, I guess, in Iraq. Thank you for your report, Jack. And that brings us to the end of this edition of Reporters here on France 24. Do stay tuned. More news and magazine shows coming up shortly.